When HBO announced the Deadwood movie in late 2018, I have to admit that I was a bit shocked. This was mainly for two reasons. The first being that I, and probably everyone else on the planet, was certain that this series had ended a long time ago and had no chance of returning in any form. The second shock came when I looked back and found out the series ended in 2006, 13 years ago. Man, I'm getting old. After that wore off, I then started to think about what the movie would be like. For years after the show ended in 2006, there were rumors floating around back then that the series may return or that a movie would be released to tie up the loose ends. And here it was, 13 years later, 13 years since the last episode, 13 years of aging on all of the actors. Could this movie actually hold up after so much time? Could the movie capture the same allure of the original series? Would this movie end up getting the Game of Thrones finale treatment? I certainly had my doubts. But after viewing this film, I have to take time to applaud the creator and the writer of the show, David Milch, for wrapping up the series in a beautiful and coherent manner that fit the legacy of the show. Just a heads up here, spoiler alert moving forward in case you haven't seen it. From the outset, the movie ropes the viewer right back into Deadwood. A train emerges from a dark tunnel, presumably a metaphor for the show roaring back into the light. Enter Calamity Jane on horseback alone, drunk as usual, and without hesitation or fanfare, she begins a Shakespearean soliloquy that was a hallmark of the series. Jane sets the stage. 10 years have gone by. She has returned for her two loves, Joni Stubbs and the long-deceased Wild Bill Hickok. Strands of the original opening theme song float through the air, and as she continues the last leg of her journey to camp, she says, "Oof, I've a left cheek ass blister, a percolating son of a bitch." This is quintessential Deadwood writing, crass beauty. The turn of a phrase changes longing and lost love to a complaint about saddle sores. From that point on, I was hooked. My expectations have been low, but I don't believe it played any part in my extra enjoyment. The movie encapsulated the world of Deadwood and gave viewers the opportunity to look in on the characters many years after we had left and see what had transpired since. The condensed format left many characters on the sidelines for the most part, but it didn't seem to harm the narrative. As the movie progressed, we got to see that although many things had changed in Deadwood over 10 years, much of it had stayed the same. Milch has said in interviews that the story revolves around civilization emerging from chaos, and the movie highlights that progress. The telephone has arrived in Deadwood as lines are being installed in the town. In prior seasons, the telegraph had arrived in camp, to most people's lamentation of technological advance. The movie also starts with the official celebration of South Dakota statehood, so we are presented with the fact that civilization has officially arrived at the town in full force. Seth Bullock was still the hard-nosed lawman who never backed down from a fight. An aging Charlie Utter was still an honorable man who believed in doing the right thing, even if it meant his life was in the balance. Al Swearingen, although dying of liver cancer, kept a firm finger on the pulse of Deadwood.
And don't our spirits raise, you murdering, conniving, thieving cocksucker.
A pregnant Trixie only became fiercer from the experience and never minced words even if she knew the danger. Watching these characters in these roles, even after such a long time, was so comforting and enjoyable it made me giddy. There is satisfaction to an ending like this. We don't feel robbed of our own thoughts. The characters acted as we expected them to act and didn't suddenly change their entire arc in order to have the story end in a way that was surprising or that firmly cemented the fate of everyone involved. I found it interesting that this movie came on the heels of the disastrous ending of Game of Thrones. No two series could have had a more diametrically opposed ending, and yet they aired on the same network within 2 weeks of one another. Deadwood faced an even larger challenge as it only had 2 hours to wrap up a storyline that it had created 13 years ago over 3 seasons, whereas Thrones had almost 8 hours to put a finish on the previous 7 seasons. An argument can be made that Game of Thrones played on a larger scale and was a different genre. However, I feel the difference does not lie in the scale or the story, but instead on the writing itself. David Milch was nominated for a Primetime Emmy for Best Writing in 2004 for Deadwood. He also won an Emmy for writing on Hill Street Blues and 3 more for his writing on NYPD Blue. The writers of Game of Thrones, D.B. Weiss and David Benioff, have a total of 2 writing Emmys between them, and they were all for Game of Thrones between 2015 and 2016. They are clearly very good writers in their own right, but Milch was able to strike gold across 3 different series and 2 different genres all by himself. Deadwood viewers finally got the send-off they had wished for so long. And unlike another recent HBO series that had a finale, this one was truly bittersweet because we had to say goodbye for a second time, with no chance of it ever returning. Al Swearingen, the man who had founded the camp decades before, lay dying, and his independent spirit remained true to the very end.
Which art in heaven.
Let him fucking stay there.
With his death, the story draws to a close. Yet viewers like myself can still think of this world. Many of the characters live on after the credits. What happens with Bullock? What happens with George Hurst? This movie is the perfect example of how to send off a story. Not all the pieces have to fit together tightly. You can leave some moments open because that is what life is really like. The movie acted as a window for us to look through, and then a shade got pulled down at the proper moment, leaving you satisfied but also wanting to see more. We all can imagine Deadwood as it continued on to present day, even though there is no series to show us every inch of that progress. The Deadwood movie represents a case study on storytelling that should be emulated by any aspiring scriptwriter, and we can only hope that HBO will sign David Milch up for more projects. Thanks for watching.